I'm not as cool as Namisha or Nestor. I'm going to use notes for this story. Oh, man. So I'm 29 years old, and I am proud to say that as of 2 months ago, I moved out of my parents' apartment. Woo! I grew up a few blocks away from here, like a 10-minute walk away from here. And I was so excited. I found this studio. It is a 10-minute walk from work because I am a fully employed millennial. Look at that. And it's a 10-minute walk from work. It's a beautiful studio. Some of you have seen it. And the landlady, who's Chinese, and I'm Chinese too, she loved that, I was like a working woman, and she lowered the rent $100 because she wanted me there, right? So I should be really happy, right? I should have been really happy at the end of July that I was moving out. But I was anxious, I was shaking, like I didn't go to bed, like I could not sleep. I was distracting myself with my boyfriend and my friends and doing a ton of work because my parents didn't want me to move out. My parents did not approve at all about this apartment, and they had been giving me the silent treatment. And I was just trying to be so good for them, but I was like, will they ever approve of this place? I walked on eggshells in front of my parents for my whole life. My parents immigrated to America, and they moved to Chinatown here, just like a 10-minute walk away from here. They had me, and from the start, they wanted me to learn English, to go to school, to be a good person, and to get work, get married, marry a nice Chinese boyfriend, and respect the family. And I didn't know all of that yet. That took a lot of years to learn because we shared a different culture. They have a very strict Chinese culture, right? And I am learning the American culture. I'm trying to be a good daughter. I'm trying to help translate mail as soon as I learn how to read, and sign up for Medicaid, fill out the Medicaid applications and the public housing applications, and going to Pathmark and Rite Aid and helping my mom translate at Rite Aid and getting the rain checks because you only buy things when they're on sale when you're a poor Chinese immigrant. And I also didn't understand my parents because they spoke a different language. They speak Cantonese and Toisanese in particular. And my Cantonese and Toisanese is terrible because they just didn't speak to us very often. They didn't say very much to us. The only things they would talk about was food, right? So they would say, oh, leo xiao gai, here's the soy sauce chicken, here's the siu mai, which my mom made for me every day for a year when I was 8 years old because she knew I loved it so much and I got sick of it. There's fan shi, which is like these yam leaves that she would make for me. So basically, the only things I knew was food because they would always say, "你要食晒啲嘢，因為我哋冇嘢食喺中國." Like we had nothing to eat in China, and we starved, and you need to eat everything on this plate, right? So I did because I was trying to make them happy. I got straight A's as a kid. And when I went to college, I actually only applied to schools in New York City because I wanted to be close by. I ended up staying on this island, of course, but I did dorm because my college provided dorming. So that's when the phone calls started, right, when I was living up there. So every day, my dad would call me at 8:30 or 9:30, and he would call and say, "Lisik Maya, have you eaten yet?" And I'd be like, "Yeah." He's like, "Lisik Maya, what'd you eat?" I was like, okay, I'm eating chicken, but it'd be like, chicken nuggets because I didn't know how to say a fried and battered chicken nuggets. So I'd just say gai chicken. Or I didn't know how to say hummus. Or what's a Chinese person gonna do with hummus, right? But all he would talk about was this food, right? And I'd be like, "Dad, you call me every day for 30 seconds to a minute to talk to me about food." But I hated these phone calls because they reminded me every day that I was a juksing, right? So juksing in Cantonese literally means hollowed out bamboo shoot. which means that like when you're an American-born Chinese like me, an ABC, that means you are an empty shell of a Chinese person, right? A juksing. That's literally what my parents call me, right? And so like all these phone calls just remind me every time how bad my Cantonese is. If I was going to like a movie theater, I'd say the place where they play the movies because I didn't know how to say movie theater. Or the place with the sand and water because I didn't know how to say beach. It was just a constant reminder that I just didn't know my parents. I didn't understand them and I didn't understand their language. And this really contrasted to when I was living in Chicago. So I lived in Chicago for 5 years after college. And I was in a relationship with a white man named Will. And I could talk to his parents about everything because unlike my parents, I shared the same language with his parents, his white parents. I could tell him about my hopes and dreams. I could tell his parents about my philosophy on life, what I wanted to do, my teacher union activism, how I wanted to fight for Asian American activism, and I couldn't tell all of that to my parents because I didn't know how to say union in Chinese, and like it made me feel so terrible. Like his parents, every time he and his parents like left each other, they always said, "I love you." And they always said, "I love you too." And I never heard that from my parents. To this day, my parents have never said, "I love you" to me, right? But I wanted that. I wanted that relationship so badly from my parents. I wanted to be more honest with them, so I started learning how to say "gongwei," which is union, because I'm working with the teachers union, right? "Zhaoyan," I'm working with Asian people, right? In Asian American activism, I like start Googling the words, and I'm going to like figure out how to talk to my parents. And I tell my parents one Thanksgiving 3 years ago, my dad calls. He's like, "Have you eaten yet?" And I was like, "I'm actually at my boyfriend's family's house right now for Thanksgiving. I'm celebrating Thanksgiving with them." Now, Chinese people, we don't celebrate Thanksgiving, right? But my dad says, "Well, you're at his house. You're at his parents' house. Why aren't you with your parents in New York City?" And then he hung up the phone. Now, this guy has called me straight every day at this point for 7 years at 9:30, right? And that after that day, he didn't call me for weeks. He was so heartbroken that I would spend that time with a white family because he didn't want me with someone who couldn't speak the language, that didn't understand Chinese culture. And that hurt. The next week, my mom called me while I was at museum, and she begged me. She was like, "Annie, please don't marry this guy." No, like I was even going to marry him. I'm just going to his house for Thanksgiving, right? But she begs me, "Please don't marry him." And I said, "Mom, if I did everything that you asked me to do, I could never live my life." But they didn't talk to me for weeks, and eventually it thawed when I came back for Christmas vacation, but I knew there was this tension, this rift between us that I couldn't live with anymore. A few months later, I decided I need to move back to New York, and I told my boyfriend at the time, and he started looking for work, and he found his dream job in San Diego, and we realized we're at a fork. This is not going to work. It did not help that my parents hated him. It didn't, yeah. So I moved home to New York 2 years ago, and, things are going okay. Like, I'm learning things. Like, I start asking my mom questions. Like, I learned my mom was a cow and pig farmer for 9 years in China. Like, and I learned just different things. Like, my mom and dad, like, met while working together. My mom would load up a rickshaw, and my dad would push the materials on a rickshaw. Like, I learned things about them that I'd never had before. But their expectations on me just mounted. They would be like, "Be home by 10 o'clock." And I was like, "I'm 29 years old. I'm not coming home at 10 o'clock." And be like, "Why?" And it would be this big mess. And I would get mad at them so often, and they would get mad at me so often. I just wanted this relationship with them. And I just didn't understand what I needed. And I sought out a therapist, and I found a Chinese American therapist. Thank goodness for her. She just understood everything. She's like, she understood how like parents don't say I love you, how we talk about food all the time, right? But at one point in July, she asked me, Annie, why are you seeking out your parents' approval so badly? Why do you need their approval so much? And I just started crying. And I told her, I know one day there will be something I do that will disappoint them, and they're going to disown me, and they will never talk to me again. And at least if I have this time with them now that I'm living at home, then, you know, I will have this time and I will not think of them as monsters for the rest of my life. My therapist looked at me and she said, Annie, there's a wound there. There's a fly there too. There's a wound there, and you have to acknowledge the wound so that it can heal. 4 days later, I start looking for apartments because I realized that if I am the one who's doing the thing they disapprove of, then I'm the one in charge. I'm the one in control. And also probably living together is not the best thing for us because we are constantly going to not meet each other's expectations, right? So 4 days after that therapy appointment, I look for apartments. The next day after that, I find the studio. The next day after that, I got approved. And then 3 days after that, I signed the lease. So like, it was 9 days. 9 days after that therapy appointment, I signed that lease. And so I start moving things in. I don't have a car. I live 10 minutes away, you know, a 10-minute walk. So I told my parents about this place, and they spent all together an hour saying, don't move, save money, be here, translate mail for us. You're a bad daughter, right? And I was like, I have to move because in my mind, this is the only way to save our relationship. For me to actualize and be my own person outside of you, but also be with you and have a relationship with you. So I go, I take every single day for maybe 2 weeks. I carry the biggest luggage I can, stuff clothes into it, waddle it down the 5th floor walk-up apartment, wheel it to Grand Street Station, waddle it down 2 more flights to the stairs, take the D train to the R train to Bay Ridge Avenue, walk it up the stairs, wheel it to my new apartment, right? And then back with an empty suitcase and do that all over again because they're refusing to help me and they're giving me the silent treatment, right? And then one day I was like, you know what? I am going to make this work. We are going to have dinner every week. I'm going to keep taking these Cantonese classes that I've been taking so I can talk to you. Like, I'm not even like a bad daughter. Like, I'm dating a Chinese guy right there. Like, and like, you know, like, like altogether, like I'm a pretty good daughter, I would say. I send home money, like I do things, I help out around, you know, all of it, right? So I'm like, Mom and Dad, like I'm coming home for dinner tonight, right? Like after having moved out. And I come home, and my mom's glaring at me, and my dad's still giving me the silent treatment. And I walk into my bedroom, which is untouched. And there are these bowls and plates on the floor, right? And Mom just comes in and says, your dad cleaned all these plates for you. And then we have dinner, and my mom's like, here's more gai soy sauce chicken for you to take home, right? And a few days after that, I come home with just my dad, and he gives me the silent treatment for like 20 minutes. And then I'm saying I'm about to leave the house, and my dad goes, you want this cabbage? And he's like, I have apples too, so he takes out some apples from the fridge. And he's like, oh, I also have cauliflower, so he gives me a cauliflower. So now I'm having this tote bag of just produce. I'm like, Papa, thank you, Dad, right? And I remembered a few years ago, back when me and my dad were fighting, and I told my dad, Ngo'oy Leia, I love you. And my dad told me back, you don't say I love you. That's not what you do. You show it. And I realized all those years that they'd been calling me and asking me about food, that was their way of showing it, you know. He would always say, oh, Leiyusik yoga, you have to eat meat for protein. Leiyusik choya, you need to buy vegetables, right? Because if he knew that I had all the vegetables and protein I needed, if he knew I was getting enough sleep, right, then he knew I was okay, even though I was away. That's how I knew, like, even though they've never said it, my parents do love me. And so I'm going to fight as hard as I can to see them. In fact, I'm going home for dinner on Monday. Thank you.